I'd like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people who are the traditional custodians of the land. I would also like to pay respect to their elders, past and present, and that's of the Wiradjuri nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians who are present. So thank you for coming, everybody, and welcome. And the schedule for this evening is a brief intro by me, Jock Cheetham. I'm a senior lecturer in journalism at Charles Sturt University and festival director of the Bathurst Multicultural Storytelling Festival. Then I'll throw to Cara King, who works for the Smith family and has done a range of community development work. And Cara will talk about some of her insights into what's happening in the community, into social connection, and into ways that storytelling can help that. We'll explore that with some questions for Cara, and I'll ask attendees to ask questions as well. And in that process, we'll look at social connection and cohesion. And then we'll move on, I hope, to, well, we intend, to talking about isolated people and what that might mean in the current context of the coronavirus. So, for example, you know, what help is needed and what can we do as communities? And then we'll touch on the idea of meeting the neighbours and Neighbour Day, which is coming up in a week. And lastly, we'll finish with the photo competition winners, which have cash prizes. So, back to my introduction. The Storytelling Festival began last year. This is the second year, the first event for this year, and we've moved online for obvious reasons. We've also got an event tomorrow at 3 p.m, also on Zoom. There's a link, a separate link where you can join us for the How I Got Here storytelling event of story sharing, and or you can just come and listen. So this whole Bathurst Multicultural Storytelling Festival began as an idea that my late partner Neroli Colvin had when she was working on her PhD and when we moved to Bathurst. She wanted to create forums that moved beyond the more obvious Harmony Day and Harmony Week celebrations into a deeper exploration that enhanced understanding. So I'm continuing that work in Neroli's memory and in her honour, and so thank you for being part of that. I will just outline one particular recent encounter I had on the topic of social connection. I was at a conference and a professor of social psychology from ANU, Catherine Reynolds, asked the audience what were the most important effects or factors influencing mortality. And she gave a whole list, and there were things ranging from access to doctors, whether you smoked, exercise, diet, and there were also factors relating to social interaction and social engagement. She asked the audience to rank them, and then she also showed a chart of what the population in general thought of that ranking. So the bottom line is that far and away the most influential factors on health and mortality, which is how long you'll live, are these issues around social interaction and social engagement. Research by social psychologists from University of Queensland and other places has shown that the more groups you belong to, the healthier you are. And that is because we're social beings. So how do we best enhance this social aspect of our communities is part of why we're here tonight. Just to finish my little story from the lecture from Professor Reynolds, the other bit of data that she pointed to was that while social interaction and social engagement were these critical elements to health, most people thought that they were a lot less, in fact, very insignificant compared to the other factors that I mentioned. So people don't actually get the importance of social engagement and interaction to everybody. So that's part of what we're here to talk about. That's enough perhaps of a sort of a general introduction, because I've got Cara waiting eagerly on the other screen. Anyway, you can see her there if you're online. So Cara King from the Smith family and from a range of other community work in Bathurst and elsewhere. Welcome, thank you. And how would you like to introduce your thoughts?
So I guess, first of all, my background, I've worked for many years working in the Bathurst community with families and particularly young people, but now also other people as well, in the areas who are experienced disadvantage, and working with them in the areas of education and employment and training. And a lot of what I have done, or ways that I've worked with families, is to try and work to build capacity and community by using storytelling as a platform. So I guess that's how Jock and I initially got very excited when we bumped into each other the other day, because I was mentioning a particular part of the community that I thought was very isolated, and that led on to this. So I guess, first of all, I have a background, I have a communications degree in theatre media from Charles Sturt University years ago. So I think storytelling has always been a core part of the way that I've worked always. And then moving into the not-for-profit and the charity sector and the education sector and working with people with disadvantage, it's always been a natural progression for me to explore people's stories and use people's stories to build connections, to build communities, and to build understanding and validation for the people that I'm doing, and also to build capacity for the people that I work with. So I guess that's my background. And so I think there's a few different things that I thought I'd talk about. First of all, the power of story, because this is the Multicultural Storytelling Festival after all. So I guess stories just have an incredible part to play in everybody's lives, but particularly they increase a person's sense, I guess, of validation in many ways. One of the projects that I worked at the university was for distance education students, and one of the ways that we use stories to validate students' experiences was by sharing other people's stories, so that you could see yourself. If you can see yourself in somebody else's story, then you realise you're not alone. You realise that your experience is actually valid, and so it does. You can validate who you are as a person and the experiences that you're having, and realise often that you are not the only one. So being valued and being validated is an important part of storytelling in a way that you use it, and being heard is also a very powerful feeling, I guess, and motivator. Stories help break down barriers, obviously. They build trust, they build empathy, social connection between separated groups. When you hear a person's story, it's much harder not to like a person. Yeah. Stories can be used for decision making, like collecting stories and sharing stories obviously impacts the way that different levels and different parts of communities can make decisions. So sharing people's stories is obviously very important for that. And the whole, I guess, whole thing of consultancy and specialising in now organisations collecting people's stories to feed and collect data as well. Stories foster a sense of community, of belonging. Sharing narratives is just a way to break down barriers. So in the projects that I worked in particularly, we also used a process of storytelling to encourage people to build their own capacity in the work that they're doing. For example, we used a process called story editing, which is a psychological theory that where if you are struggling and you hear somebody's story and you can see that in their story they have experienced the same struggles as you and managed to succeed, then that can also help you to change your own story and your narrative as well. So there's many ways that I've used stories kind of to build community in online platforms, via videos, via interactive comic strips, and sitting and listening and sharing, and even in forums like this.
Thanks for that. That's really interesting. I might as well just pick up straight away on that last point you made about story editing, which is a theory, and it's a theory that you applied. Can you tell us a little bit more about the theory and perhaps maybe the psychology in lay terms, I suppose, of that? What's going on with that process that you would briefly describe?
It's a psychological theory that we came across when we were designing a project for the university, and we were looking at all different ways that we could build capacity in students that were first in their family to come to university. So students that hadn't been to university, hadn't experienced tertiary education, and were walking in without that cultural capital potentially. So as well as using stories, we used other, support networks as well to design a big program. Story editing is really a theory where if you can see yourself, exactly what I said. So for example, Timothy Winton and we effectively as well, if you're a first year student and you're at university and you are struggling and your narrative, your personal narrative, you are telling yourself, I can't do this, I'm not coping. If you hear firsthand stories and experiences of second year students saying, hey, I struggled, I was terrible at it, I failed a couple of subjects, I did this, this and this, now I'm coping. And if you can hear that in lots of different voices and lots of different ways, then you can see that that person is you potentially, or you can see yourself in those stories, you can see that you're not alone, and you can be encouraged to edit your behaviour to succeed by realising that you're not a failure. And you know what I mean? So you can edit your own narrative. So it's encouraging people to edit their own narrative by seeing that you're not alone and that people in your position are able to succeed and have in the past.
So it's sort of positive stories, and in a way it's the opposite of this social media phenomena where people see these idealized pictures or posts on their friends or acquaintances accounts, and they think, oh my God, I can't be like that, and my life's crap and their life's great and all of that. By getting these kind of more authentic, detailed, presumably real stories.
Yeah, authentic and real is the key, and it's not necessarily always positive. It can be a struggle, it can be really hard, but it doesn't mean that you can't necessarily, or if you can't here, potentially you can somewhere else. So that your story isn't just what it is now, and that you do have the ability to edit it, and that failure here now in one area potentially can lead, depending on who you are. But understanding and owning the ability to edit your narrative is a big part of it. So it's about building capacity through other people's stories and experiences by seeing yourself within them.
What's an example of how you actually went about doing that? How did you structure the work that allowed the students to tell stories, share them, and then hear them, and then go through this process?
Yep. So I did it in two very different ways for two very different projects. So for the First in Family project, we did a big research project first. So we sent out surveys and we got stories that way and data that way. But then I also spent literally 2.5 years with a video camera, sitting down and spending half a day with as many diverse First in Family students that we could find. Aboriginal students, students with disabilities. We went to the ISRA Centre, that's the Islamic Studies CSU Centre, and interviewed students there. Mature age students, everyone we could find, blind students, students with disabilities, students studying every course that we could find, anyone who was First in Family. And we sat down and we videoed and recorded and we made short documentary films on every element of the university experience that we could think of. So we looked at student finances, we looked at emotional capacity, we looked at how do you talk to your family at home, we talked about balancing work-life balance when you're distance students, all elements of that, and made short, sharp little videos that students could explore either by hooking in on topic, but also we made documentaries on each individual student's experience as well. So different ways that you could hook into that information. And then when we provided those videos via Facebook or via the websites, with links that would, offer areas of, so a video on, how hard it is financially would lead you to different financial services as well.
And that's the material that people engaged with in terms of being able to do that story editing you described.
Another project that I did as well, though, is we ran isolated students from the university. We had a chat room, and distance students would call in, and we would just discuss topics and just get it off the chest and form a sense of community for distance students. But then after that chat session, each session we would go through and we would look for themes that came out through the chat transcripts, and then we would turn those into comic strips and we would release those via social media to other distance education students, and the conversations that happened under that, when students could see, I'm not alone, I'm not the only one that's struggling with work-life balance, or I'm not the only one who's, reading textbooks while we're at the side of the football field. So that was another way of validating experience, forming community, and also encouraging you to keep going because you're not alone.
That's fantastic. It's a very creative response to that initial conversation, and it also brings to mind the idea that we can come back to later, but that the online forums can overcome distance. In that case, it was distance education, and now we'll be talking about maybe social distancing and isolation created by this virus. And so what about social connection more broadly, Cara? I'll ask you one thing maybe about your work, if you wanted to talk about some of the issues that you come up with, maybe to do with grandparents as parents. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah.
And then I'll see if we can get some any interest from the audience to ask questions, or should I say the other people in the meeting or the webinar. So yeah, please. Yep. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so currently I work for the Smith family, and I work supporting families in the education of their children, and we only work with families that experience financial disadvantage. And an incredible number, and this is how Jock and I initially started talking, is that we were talking about the hidden socialisation that I am finding within my work, unexpected pockets of community members where I'm working with them and I had never really considered their level of social isolation. And one of the key areas that I really am struck with and that I work with every day is the increasing number of grandparents who are primary carers for very young children, and finding themselves suddenly caring for very young children as their role, after kind of thinking that they'd done that. And it is an incredibly large pocket of our community that I really had never really worked with. And the different ways that they personally are feeling socially isolated because of the new role that they find themselves in.
Why have they ended up taking up these roles? What are the prompts?
It's generally, there is, I hate to say it, there is a generation here of parents that are not capable currently of caring for their children, and a lot of them have a lot of children. So there are, it might be drugs, it might be domestic violence, it might be, issues around financial disadvantage. There is a level, and there is a large number of people my age, I guess, that aren't capable of looking after their children. And grandparents generally in the current climate are the ones that are ending up, quite often not necessarily wanting to end up, but ending up as carers of often 4 or 5 grandchildren all of a sudden at a time of their life when they really had thought that they had passed that stage of their life. And it is highly isolating on a number of levels for these predominantly women, although I have got a couple of grandparents as carers, like grandfathers, often single. It's financially isolating for them. They're often, single grandparents now all of a sudden educating children in nappies sometimes, and starting completely from scratch.
Up to 70 years old, or?
Yeah, and I was working with, I work with a lot of them, but, one this morning, you know, she's, well, nearly 70. She's got 3 grandchildren that she's been caring for the last 4 years, but since they were 2. You know, so there's taking that on, there's taking the relationships that are going on within those kids' families as well, and facts and all of that. There's financially looking after them. And then there's the isolation that comes from that. And I think that's where it really is that they really, I'm finding that this particular part of the community don't really fit. They're taken away from their social network because they're busy now. They're caring for young children. They're doing school drop-offs. They're doing pickups. They're often trying to work in amongst it when they were ready to retire or they had retired. So there's that part of it. But then there's the isolation too of not fitting in with the adults who are the primary carers of their grandchildren's peers. So there's not fitting in socially with the other people and feeling also often that you are the only one in this situation. So it is rather isolating. And then on top of that, the isolation or I guess the self-doubt around that role, around the use of technology and educating their kids, around doing lunch orders online, around doing all of that, around how the education system has changed. And yeah,
and so that's a whole area of disadvantage and isolation and so on that you actually weren't aware of before you started this job. And I actually wasn't aware of before you told me. And that's yet another way in which not only the grandparents, but the children can experience disadvantage.
Yeah. So a big thing at the moment is me trying to sort of let them know that they're not alone. It's like, you know, you're not the only ones. And incredibly, luckily, there's now in Orange, I'm so excited, there is a group of grandparents who have started their own support group, Grandparents as Carers in Orange, because they themselves were so desperate, because they just felt so isolated, but also having to also navigate systems around, you know, through facts and all of these systems that they haven't had to deal with as well, government issues and heaps. It's massive for them, and it is a really isolating experience. So that's one group.
Yeah, that's right. Among a range of others, maybe we can talk about some of those others as well as the ones that you've brought up. And doing that, we can maybe try and bring in some other people who want to speak or ask questions, talk about their activities or their ideas of where there's areas of need or solutions. And the other thing I wanted to talk about as well was whether people had any insights into what social connection is actually working as well. So this is the invitation for our small but perfectly formed attendees in the meeting to jump in and make this a broader discussion. I'm working with Kevin, who's kindly volunteered to set all of this technology up and keep everything running, and he's unmuting people's microphones. I could just ask people to call out if you like. Did you want to maybe unmute a few more to see if anyone had any questions?
Most people.
Oh, they're mostly unmuted. Okay. Does anyone want to jump in?
I think there's also a hands up button that people can press so I can see who wants to talk.
Okay. If you can see your hands up button.
There we go, Jackie. Yep, Jackie's unmuted, so she can talk if she wants.
Great. Go ahead, Jackie.
Hi, yeah, I work with communities in Sydney, and we usually run groups for families with children that are at home and also for seniors who are quite socially isolated. So we're looking at what we can do if we have to close or down all those groups so that we can maintain connection with people. And I know that a lot of other services like ours are doing the same. So I guess I'm thinking it would be great if there's ways that people that are much more tech savvy than those of us that are community workers can share information about easy to use technology so that people can be linking up in kind of virtual groups, if that's possible. I mean, we've been thinking probably it would have to be small groups, but also the possibility of larger events. Yes, I'd love your ideas about how we might be able to connect with other people that have knowledge of that technology to share with the community around, well, probably even around the world, potentially, isn't it?
Mm, mm.
I'd be interested to ask just quickly before Cara jumps in, how did you find the process of jumping into this Zoom, Jackie, and was it like easy enough?
Yeah, yes, it was really easy. But I've got a phone that I could download the app really easily. That's one of the problems we're finding with that, particularly the seniors that are in their late 80s and 90s. Some of them don't have family to help them. Is how we're basically doing a survey now, finding out what technology people have, if they've got internet, just to get the conversation started so we can start getting prepared for what we might be able to do in the future. Yeah. But I found this was good, but I have heard that there is a bit more of a backlog on Zoom these days because it's quite popular.
Yeah, right. Fair enough. Cara, did you have some thoughts?
I was going to say Zoom does work, but not for the cohort that you're talking about. And it's really hard. And we're talking about some of the things because not only are we trying to work out how to connect with the primary carers of the kids that we work with, but also to connect the kids. And a lot of our families have one smartphone in a house of 5 or 6 or 10 kids. So, and like households, like the access to technology for people is a real barrier to being able to connect. So it is really rough. And even I was just saying to Jock earlier, I was suggesting to my mother, because she will potentially be self-isolating on her own and is in a book club. And I said, keep your times, but connect online. And I'll come up and she said, oh, they won't do it. They won't connect. They don't know the technology. So maybe it's just going to have to be phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes, I don't know. And you can do, like, I don't know, because I would like to be able to connect. We run learning clubs as well. And we've had to stop running our learning clubs with, disadvantaged kids. But I know that running them via technology is going to be really tricky. As a group, we're struggling with the same issue with those particular cohorts. There's a budgie in here.
I believe there's some people who have joined this meeting via phone. So Zoom is one possible way to create the conference, but obviously if you just have a phone, then you can just phone into anything. But I don't know if anyone has any suggestions of any other just as simple or better ways to do phone conferencing, because obviously that's the point, right? It's having more than 2 people. One of the disadvantages of video is that it can take a lot of bandwidth and slow down, and it can be like have technical glitches. I've noticed from quite regularly, but it obviously has the great advantage of seeing people. Does anybody have any thoughts on good ways to do phone conferencing or other good simple technologies that people can use?
Facebook Messenger is great, but I don't know about the privacy. I know that may be an issue with groups, but most people nowadays are at least on Facebook and are a little bit familiar with Facebook. So groups in Facebook are a great way to also swap photos and things privately. And then Messenger in Facebook can be a really good way to video or audio call groups. And you can set up groups in Facebook, and it's your internet. It's not a phone call.
Yeah. And Jackie, back to you if you had any response or thoughts.
Am I on?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, we do have some laptops that have been donated to us, so we're thinking about getting, finding people that are tech savvy to kind of load them on in a way that's, 3 steps for people that we can then teach them, turn it on here, that kind of stuff, so that if they don't have the technology, they can link in. But of course, that relies on the internet. And my friend Neve, who's here with me, suggested the other day that we get a grant and maybe get some, cheap phones, even get Samsung to help to or, you know, somebody like that to donate phones, and then we can share them and swap them around with people. Perhaps we could ask libraries, I guess, to even do that and have some, because I know that they've got systems with audiobooks and stuff that are fantastic, but maybe even if we could have bigger libraries of sharing, so that groups like the book groups or the groups like ours could actually book in a time, and then they could, you know, be delivered by whether it's volunteers or workers that are able to drop them off to people's doorsteps or something. Yeah, that's just some of the ideas that we've been having.
You can get pretty cheap phones these days, smartphones. So that could be easier than the logistics of sharing. And also, most people have smartphones, though, I suspect. But you're suggesting that maybe that some of you over 80s don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And and the people in their 90s, and they tend to be the more socially isolated and people that we really want to keep connections with.
Yeah, okay. So then that extra effort is worthwhile then to actually make that happen.
That's
and that
right.
also sort of brings to mind the just general isolation that people might feel in terms of less social interaction if they're really putting themselves at home and not going out at all because of the virus, not even going shopping. How do they get their shopping? How do they get their, you know, even just seeing people occasionally? And I was talking about this with Claire Wright, the Uniting Church minister, and we were talking about you can still talk to your neighbours. You don't have to necessarily go into their house. The screen could be shut and you could be talking from 3 metres away. Now, whether they want that or you want that is, I suppose, a question for every individual. But you don't have to step away from people completely or socially just because there is a distance that you need to maintain. And so that's what will allow, say, volunteers to go around, because, you know, they don't necessarily have to get in people's space if they're going to help them, or to drop off shopping or what have you.
Yeah, exactly. We're thinking of that.
Is there anyone else who wants to put up their hand? I know if we've got an Annette or two here. Is that one of those Annette Rogers? I will allow you to talk in case you wanted to. If you've got any thoughts there, any of the Annettes. If not, that's fine. Anyone else? I don't think so. So what I was thinking, Cara, that we could discuss is how it might actually work, and Jackie and anyone else, how it might actually work, that we actually get together to help the people who need helping. So the first thought I had was that my immediate neighbours. So Neighbour Day is an annual event that encourages people to meet their neighbours. The reason is, I think, reasonably clear that people in general are meeting their neighbours less often, and there's something of a fragmentation, particularly if you drive in and out of your house, but even, you know, in any circumstances, there's a lot less engagement with communities happening over the past few decades. So Neighbour Day is trying to sort of counter that trend, but unfortunately it says have an event and invite a whole lot of people around.
Most allow you to talk.
Okay, so I think we've got some people who are talking about talking, but maybe not quite ready yet.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello, Annette. Did you want to jump in and say something?
Yes, I was very interested with Cara talking about the grandparents, and there was another issue that I was wondering if it had been used with storytelling, and that is storytelling concerning domestic violence.
Thank you.
Have you had any experience with this?
No, Annette, I work with, and that is something that I was just going to say with Neighbours Day. This coronavirus lockdown terrifies me with the situation around domestic violence that is potentially going to be heightened when families that are in volatile relationships are potentially shut down together for a period of time in what is already an anxious thing. A lot of my families, you have no idea, the surprise around grandparents is nothing compared to the number of my families that are DV sufferers and DV escapees or currently on, it's incredible. It's blown my mind, just this role and what I'm doing. That is something that I would love to explore, and how we do it in the future. That's something that I really is something that I just, I haven't explored who has used storytelling in the past around it, but I think there's a huge need for the women and the men and the children that are involved in that, but also for the broader community to realise just how full on and prevalent this really is in our society. So no, but if you, is that something that you're interested in talking about or working on in the future, that is something that I would love to talk to you, Annette, about, because...
Yes,
well, I know, go ahead, Annette, sorry.
Yes, it is a subject that I'm interested in. And also I can see that the social isolation would have great problems, because the normal storytelling just between friends or between normal social contacts, where women or men can communicate with each other about their problems and about if they have somebody they can confide in about the domestic violence, and that will be cut off. And so that makes life a lot more difficult for many people.
Yeah. And that's why I think being aware of who your neighbours are, being aware, I think it is really important that we are aware of just listening and being conscious of what's going on around us through this, that we don't just become so isolated that we are completely cut off. And in my role, we're moving to not doing face-to-face interviews, which is pretty much how I spend my day, working face-to-face with families, and it'll all be over the phone now. And I know that the conversations that I'll be having with families will be completely different. They'll be guarded. They'll be, everyone's going to be on top of each other. It's going to be a really tricky situation. And I really think that that's an area that people higher and bigger than me are really considering the impact that this is going to have on people's safety.
Yes, I agree. Yes, thank you for being interested in that, and I would be interested to hear anything in the future that you are doing in this area.
Yeah, it's.
I might ask Jackie if she wants to respond, but because Jackie has a lot of background with domestic violence work of policy areas included, but also since we have Katerina here, and just did you want to say anything, Katerina, or ask anything? We'll unmute you. The only reason we mute people is so that there's no feedback, really. But anyway, in the absence of hearing anything, maybe Jackie, did you have any thoughts on domestic violence?
Yeah, that's something that we've been talking about as well, because community education around healthy relationships and respectful relationships is part of what we're doing at the neighbourhood centre level in terms of the early intervention and trying to raise awareness and increase healthy relationships. So we've got a program that we're trying to do around that, and obviously now starting to think, how can we do that online and what other different kind of methods we can. But the storytelling, I think, is true, that's definitely part of it, and people sharing their stories of survival is incredibly powerful. So it'd be great to be working more on that, and we're certainly looking at doing digital stuff and linking with websites and things as well. But in terms of people that are, in relationships that are violent, that, where there's people that are violent, that is something that's, very much a concern, I think, of everybody working in this kind of sector at the moment, concerning about how that's going to potentially be escalating and and people's help seeking, how that's going to be affected by the changes, all of that kind of stuff. The police and the emergency services, you know, I guess it's trying to think about what might be coming up so that we can plan for things and work in with the other service providers. I think that's something that people are doing, but the more the conversations that we have like this, the better.
And knowing, like we were discussing it today in a team meeting, just finding out how everybody is going to operate. You know, we're all moving to home. And so what other services, what are other people doing? How can we connect when we find somebody, when everybody's workspaces and ways of working are changing now? How, as we as support people, can we be ready to support and connect people so that they're not isolated with the supports they need in such a changing environment as well? So we need to be sharing our stories with each other so that we can support everyone too.
Yeah.
Just Kevin just jumped in, zapped a feedback there. Nice job, Kevin. Okay, thanks for those. I have been in contact with the Uniting Church, and they were just one example of a local community group that is organising their own outreach. And so they're basically collecting volunteers, I suppose. One of their issues is that a lot of their congregation are old, so they're actually the ones who are self-isolating. So they don't necessarily have a huge capacity within their church, even though those people would be willing. But that brings to mind the fact that a lot of other churches will be doing similar things. I don't know whether it's necessary to do any coordinating, but I asked the council what capacity it had to respond to this social isolation issue that was now arising. I asked them that on Wednesday night at their last public council meeting, apparently. And they said very little, which basically seemed to mean none, I think. And the reason for that is they saw it as a state government thing, and state governments had the funding through different programs. But then if we're in Bathurst, you know, the state government seems a long way away. In fact, state government probably seems a long way away to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know about that coordination, whether that is, or at least sharing of what people are doing. I think I can see a benefit to that. You know, if churches are doing it, like, you know, sharing what they're doing, or sharing resources, or getting volunteers from areas of people who are willing to volunteer but maybe aren't connected with groups that need people.
Yeah. So we as an organisation heavily rely on volunteers as well, and as do most organisations that are in this sector. And that fact that the people who do volunteer are self-isolating themselves is a real concern, because we have lost, as the Smith family, our capacity to do so much of our work instantly. It's interesting. But our interagencies out here, I have to say, Orange Interagency, John Kellett here in Bathurst, the Lithgow, you know, they do a fantastic job of keeping us communicating via email. But sometimes it feels that there's so much information that there's not really an overall picture, and things are changing so quickly. It'll be interesting.
That's like news too, isn't it? Like, you need to kind of keep up with lots of bits of information, but where is the big picture and connection? Yeah. Has anybody else got some comments or issues they want to raise, or responses?
Yeah, I was thinking that I think that's a really good idea about the volunteers. We have been talking about that here locally as well, because we have a lot of volunteers, and similarly a lot of them are older. But potentially the staff in our services, and certainly our local council, I spoke to some of the staff there the other day, they feel that they're going to be freed up in a way from the regular running groups type work and the running events work. So they're starting to say, okay, what can we do that's different, that's supporting people? So that, and I think that it'd be great to find like ways of mapping, you know, like more creative ways of mapping how we can match up people. But I guess in some ways the other side is that we worry about if they're sharing volunteers that you're not familiar with, training them, getting all of the police checking and all of the training done, and then the supports for those people, as well as all the safety that you need to do. If they're not existing volunteers, is quite a process. So unfortunately, very conscious here of the health and safety.
Volunteer cleared.
Yeah, that's an issue that hadn't even occurred to me. So that's a real roadblock. Although it does mean that it does leave a space perhaps for, I was just making a few notes there, it leaves a space for the informal groups that aren't necessarily covered by the laws. For example, I can do things with my neighbours if they let me, and there's no one tells me I can't. I think Katerina has raised her hand. Did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I'll just jump in on the point of the volunteers. There is an organisation I've recently become aware of. I haven't worked with them, and I'm still kind of getting my head across how the platform works. But you might have heard of Communiteer, and it's again relatively new, but it's about connecting willing volunteers, generally in the corporate space. So people like professional skills that want to use their skills for good. So that might be something that might be of value to
yeah, that's good, especially if they have local kind of ways to do that.
Something else that just occurred to me is, because I've got kids and all of their social platforms and all of their out of school lives have all just been cancelled. So there is no soccer. There is no football. There's all of these people that are used to doing things together that aren't actually doing it. Maybe we can start to utilise some of these sporting clubs or groups that are actually already formed that are used to doing stuff together, that have no training, no Saturdays being taken up. All of that is gone. Maybe there are ways that we can access people and get really creative about how we connect with different groups, and go to basketball teams, local football teams, and say, hey, we know you're free on a Saturday morning. How about we utilise you guys in a different way? You don't necessarily be running around on the football field together, but we could use you this way. Uni's just about to shut down. All those uni students that are, doing a couple of hours online instead of living on campus. There's all of these people now that have, a heap of spare time, just like you said with your workers, whoever that was, like within councils and stuff. There's a lot of people with a lot of free time probably now, because all of their sporting events, the theatres are shut, all of the, the amateur theatre groups are shut, all those other social networks have all stopped. Maybe we should be, as a community, trying to leverage some of those groups that already exist and get them doing bulk food, deliveries, hooking in with meals and whatever it is. Maybe there's a different way to use those groups.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And maybe if they want more exercise, they could do it quickly. So,
on their bikes.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Jackie, your point about council some people in council having freer agendas is a good one. And maybe the response I got when I asked the question was just like an immediate off the cuff thing, but it will actually transpire that there is some capacity there, as you say, at ours as well as yours. So any other hands up there? Any other people want to suggest something? Jackie, go ahead.
Oh yeah, there's the Volunteering New South Wales is another resource. So we use them a lot. I might kind of contact them and suggest that they look at more creative ways of linking people up as well, actually. But I think that the sporting groups and the theatre groups, that's a fantastic idea. We can definitely connect with them and see if we can leverage more support. And I know that we've spoken to Meals on Wheels locally here, and they said they're already flat chat, and of course that is going to be an issue for some people with, as you said, the shopping, but those people that may not want to be going shopping, where if they can't get it delivered, Meals on Wheels is already quite stretched. So there are options that maybe we can even, those kinds of groups that can help deliver would be great, or even deliver shopping.
Neve here sitting with Jackie. This is not my area of work at all, but on my local residential, suburb Facebook page, which has been How can I help? What can I do? And nobody has a good answer for them because we're all working from home now. I've got extra time. I'm not doing anything. I could, but I don't know any of my neighbors. And there's a lot of people saying that. So maybe these organizations that you guys are talking about need to start advertising to the masses who are actually willing and able to help more than they normally would be.
Yeah, and there could be an element of not wanting to reinvent the wheel. Although I think we should, if there's a need, we should make a wheel maybe, but not sort of wait for other people to do it. But at the same time, maybe there's a really efficient way for these expert organisations to do it as well.
Exactly, people, yeah.
Yeah. So we can look into that. I suppose we can all look into it. Those of us who have contacts to see what's happening. Perhaps even some students could look into it journalistically here, or we could ask some journalism friends about that. As a potential things to investigate or what have you. Yeah. Thanks for all that. Any other thoughts or comments? You know what I could do now, because it's nearly 6:30, not that we have to finish at 6:30, but just that, we've been going for about an hour, is that I could show you some photos and announce the winners of the photo competition. So what we have in the Bathurst Multicultural Storytelling Festival website, which is bathurststorytelling.com, is a series of competitions that have run, and they have been judged, and Kevin, my lovely assistant, has just clicked on the page there, and you can see that this is the long list of the photos. Would you mind? Yeah, there we go. Thanks for that. So I'm going to pull up as well some of the judges' comments as we go through these, but this is one evidently that speaks across generations, and there's a lot implicit, I thought, in this photo. A lovely shot. That's the first one. The next one. This one I love because it's so abstract in a sense, but as soon as the sort of connection and the diversity was pointed out in the caption, it became clear what a powerful shot that one is. What's the next one? Yeah, that's lovely. Would you mind scrolling through a few more, please, Kevin? And then, yeah. That's the begonia garden in the greenhouse begonia garden in Bathurst in McCaddy Park. And this one here is the winning entry. That's submitted by Alex Wood, and it's her son and his pop. I'm just looking for the judges' comments on this, if you bear with me. But if we could keep going there, please. Yeah, like as you can see, the quality of these shots is fantastic. There's a real diversity of ideas, and there's a real quality of images as well. I was really happy with the long list. This one's a welcoming ceremony with an Wiradjuri elder, Uncle Brian, cleansing a visitor from China, Guyane. The connection here is in the bridge there, if among other things, a nice landscape shot. And my personal favourite here, I just love the combination of light there, that late afternoon light with the shadows, the composition itself, and the different colours and aspects of the lines there across the frame, and then the moment of catching those two girls looking up and the boy poised in his dad's arm being swung around. This one's the People's Choice Award, which Samuel Williamson submitted. And the last one, yeah, that's the last one. Oh, the last two. Both very sweet. I really like those family ones. So, Kevin, if you don't mind popping back to the little girl in the dirt, please. Jessica McCann came second with that one. So it's $250 first prize and $100 second prize. But to my mind, there was a lot of different views among the judging panel. To my mind, 6 or 8 of those photos could have won. So congratulations. Not that I don't think any of the winners are here, but nevertheless, that was a fun part of the process. And I want to do that again, actually, to open up another competition for writing and possibly photography, so to give people some things to do while they're cooped up at home. And by the way, speaking of that, Monica Morse, who's a counsellor, is privately starting a group called Bathurst at Home, which is the name of her Facebook group, to talk about issues of what people can do when they are at home, and activities and things sort of, you know, related to what we're talking about tonight. So that's pretty much everything I think that we had on the schedule and the agenda. Thanks again, Kevin, for your support. That was great. It seemed to work really smoothly. It's fantastic for me. It's my first Zoom, and it's my first Zoom to Facebook Live. And so I think now we know how to do it, we can do it again if we can, you know, reach the right people. Right. So thank you, Cara, for sharing your thoughts, and thank you, Jackie, Katerina. I missed Jackie's name, Jackie's friend, who was sitting next to her. Liz, is it? And Annette.
Dave.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for coming. Is there anybody has any final comments or statements, or even just goodbyes?
Stay connected, I guess. Look after yourselves. It's the thing. Look after each other.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, thanks, Cara. Okay, well, maybe in the absence of being able to hear any comments there, thank you, everyone, and I'll say goodbye.